I remember the exact sound of the neural induction nodes activating for the first time. Not the scream that followed, though that came later and never truly stopped echoing in my mind, but the sound before the scream. A soft electrical hum that built into a crystalline whine like glass being drawn across metal under immense pressure, rising in pitch until it existed just at the edge of human hearing. That sound meant the pain glove was fully engaged, meant the silvery wires embedded in the steel-formed tunic were now exposing every nerve ending in the wearer's body to precisely calibrated agony, meant that the Astartes, standing in the chamber before me, was about to experience suffering that would reduce an unaugmented human to a catatonic vegetable within 30 seconds. The temperature in the penitential chamber was kept at exactly 18 degrees Celsius, cold enough that you could see your breath, but not so cold that your fingers would lose dexterity on the control lectern. I learned later this was intentional. They needed us steady. They needed us functional. They needed us to maintain perfect precision while we tortured demigods who thanked us for it afterward. I was 14 years old when they selected me from the serf training cadres aboard the Phalanx. My name was Corian Valve, and I had spent the first 13 years of my life in the Fortress Monastery's lower educational tiers, learning High Gothic, basic Medicae protocols, and the Lectitio Divinitatus, alongside 300 other serf children whose families had served the Imperial fists for generations. My father had been a deck technician who died when a plasma conduit ruptured during a training exercise. My mother worked in the textile manufactorum, weaving the tabards and chapter banners that adorned the Phalanx's ceremonial halls. She had dark eyes that creased at the corners when she smiled, which was rare, and hands perpetually stained with synthetic dyes. I remember she held me the night before I left for specialized training. Held me without speaking because there was nothing to say, and I felt the slight tremor in her arms that meant she was crying silently the way serfs learn to cry, without sound, without complaint, without expecting comfort from a universe that offered none. The apothecary who evaluated my psychological profile was named Brother Kelvis. He was 347 years old, I learned later, and his face had the stern, weathered quality of fortress walls that had withstood siege after siege. His augmetic left eye whirred and clicked as he examined the data slate containing my test results, and when he spoke, his voice carried the gravelly resonance of someone who had swallowed smoke and ash and spent centuries giving orders over the roar of battle. He asked me if I understood what pain was. I told him I had broken my arm once during training exercises. Told him I remembered what that felt like. He made a sound that might have been laughter in someone less stoic, a brief exhalation through his nose, and told me I understood nothing. He told me pain was holy. He told me the chapter's founder, Rogel Dorn himself, had created the pain glove as a tool of penance and meditation, a way for his warriors to cleanse themselves of doubt and weakness through suffering. He told me I would be trained to operate this device, to monitor the physiological responses of Astartes undergoing voluntary penance, to ensure they experienced maximum agony without dying. He asked me if I was capable of this duty. I was 14. I said yes, because saying no was not an option presented to me. The training began immediately. They moved me to specialized quarters in the Phalanx's Medicae deck, a narrow cell with a cot, a wash basin, and a wall-mounted shrine to the Emperor containing a small candle that I was required to keep lit at all times. The cell was 6 meters from the penitential chambers, close enough that I could hear the sessions even through reinforced bulkheads. A constant background drone of muffled screaming that became the soundtrack to my adolescence. My instructor was an elderly serf named Harmon Keld, who had operated the pain glove for 43 years, before his hands developed tremors severe enough that he could no longer maintain the precise control necessary. His fingers shook constantly, even when clasped behind his back, and his eyes had the hollow 1,000-yard stare of someone who had witnessed too much suffering and internalized none of it, because internalization meant madness. He taught me to read the biometric displays on the control lectern, to interpret the cascading data streams that monitored heart rate, neural activity, hormone levels, and 24 other physiological indicators. He taught me which levels of pain caused temporary unconsciousness, which caused permanent neural damage, which approached the absolute limits of even enhanced Astartes physiology. He taught me that our job was to walk the razor's edge between penance and death, to push the battle brothers to the absolute threshold of what they could endure and then sustain them there for hours. The first time I witnessed a session, I vomited. Brother Kelvas had warned me this might happen, had placed a waste receptacle beside the control station for this purpose, had told me that many trainee operators experienced physical revulsion during their initial exposures. The Astartes was a veteran sergeant named Kador, who had requested penance after a training exercise where his squad failed to breach a simulated fortress within the allocated time parameters. The pain glove looked deceptively simple when dormant. A sleeveless tunic constructed of articulated steel plates connected by thousands of hair-thin wires that gleamed like spiderwebs under the chamber's harsh lumens. When Brother Kador pulled it over his head and positioned himself in the center of the chamber, arms spread, head bowed, the device seemed almost ceremonial. Harmon activated the neural induction sequence, and I watched the data streams on my display spike as electrical currents surged through the wires, stimulating every nerve cluster simultaneously. Brother Kador's entire body went rigid. His jaw locked. His eyes, which had been closed in meditation, snapped open so wide I could see the whites all around his irises. The sound he made was not human. It was a resonating howl that seemed to come from his chest cavity itself, amplified by his enhanced lung capacity into something that rattled the chains hanging from the chamber's ceiling. The session lasted 93 minutes. For 93 minutes, I watched a space marine, a transhuman warrior capable of crushing my skull with his bare hand, experience agony so profound that his superhuman biology barely kept him conscious. When Harmon finally deactivated the device, Brother Kador collapsed. 2 chapter serfs entered to remove the pain glove and assist him to the recovery medici bay. As they dragged him past my station, his eyes briefly met mine. He nodded. He thanked me for my service. I ran to the waste receptacle and emptied my stomach until there was nothing left but bile and shame. If you think 14 is too young to learn how to torture people, you're right, but the Imperium does not care about right. It cares about function. Comment the word witnessed below if you understand what it means to serve in ways that destroy your soul. They gave me 2 weeks of observation before my first solo operation. 2 weeks of standing beside Harmon, watching his hands manipulate the control lectern's haptic interfaces with the precision of a surgeon. Learning to interpret the subtle changes in biometric data that indicated an Astartes was approaching genuine medical crisis versus simply experiencing profound suffering. I learned that heart rate could spike to 400 beats per minute without indicating danger in an Astartes physiology. I learned that neural activity could fragment into patterns that would mean brain death in a normal human, but merely indicated extreme stress in an enhanced warrior. I learned to recognize the specific hormone cascade that meant a battle brother was entering a dissociative state where pain became abstract, and to immediately adjust the pain glove's output to drag them back to full agonizing consciousness because dissociation defeated the entire purpose of penance. I learned that the point was not simply to hurt them, the point was to make them fully, completely, absolutely aware of the hurt. The point was to ensure that every single nerve ending was screaming and that the mind remained clear enough to process every scream. My first solo operation was a young battle brother named Kalos, who had been elevated from the scout company only 6 months prior. He had requested penance for a training accident where his bolter discharged prematurely, damaging a practice servitor. It was a minor infraction. His penance session was scheduled for only 30 minutes. I remember my hands shaking as I initialized the neural induction sequence. Remember Harmon standing behind me like a shadow, watching my every movement, ready to intervene if I made an error. The pain glove activated. Brother Kalos screamed. For 30 minutes, I modulated the intensity, keeping his vital signs within acceptable parameters, while ensuring the pain never decreased below the threshold of total agony. When the session ended and he stood, swaying, sweat pouring from his body in sheets, despite the chamber's cold temperature, he looked at me with something that might have been gratitude, or might have been the blank gaze of someone still half lost in the landscape of suffering. He whispered the Emperor's prayer of endurance. He left the chamber, walking on legs that barely supported his enhanced frame. I stood at my station for 20 minutes afterward, staring at the now empty chamber, wondering what I had just done, and knowing I would do it again tomorrow and the day after that for the rest of my life. The psychological impact of the work manifested gradually. For the first 6 months, I thought I was coping well. I performed my duties efficiently. I maintained the equipment with obsessive precision. I studied advanced biometric monitoring during my off hours, determined to become expert in the calibrated administration of suffering. But sleep became difficult. The sound of the neural induction sequences, crystalline wine, began appearing in my dreams, building and building until I woke with my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. I stopped eating in the communal serf mess hall because the conversations of other serfs, discussing normal duties like equipment maintenance or supply logistics, felt alien and incomprehensible. How could they talk about routine things when I spent my shifts monitoring the systematic torture of demigods? How could anything feel routine when you had watched a 300-year-old veteran weep like a child while thanking you for his pain? I started eating alone in my cell, mechanically consuming the nutrient paste and protein wafers that constituted our diet, tasting nothing, simply fueling a body that needed to function at its station. The chapter's chaplains conducted mandatory psychological evaluations every 6 months for all serfs serving in specialized roles. The chaplain who evaluated me was named Brother Tamarian, and his skull-faced helm sat on the table between us during our interview like a silent third party to the conversation. He asked me if I felt guilt about my duties. I told him I did not know. He asked me if I believed the battle brothers deserved their pain. I told him that deserving was irrelevant. They requested it, therefore I provided it. He nodded slowly, the gesture oddly gentle for someone whose daily existence involved roaring catechisms of hate at alien enemies. He told me that my answer demonstrated correct understanding of duty. He told me that what I felt personally was unimportant compared to what the chapter required functionally. He told me that my lack of emotional clarity was not a flaw, but rather an adaptation, a necessary numbness that would allow me to serve for decades without succumbing to madness. He told me this was holy work. He asked me if I believed that. I sat in silence for 97 seconds, counting them on the chronometer mounted above his head, before I answered yes, because it was the answer that would allow me to continue functioning. By my 16th birthday, I was the primary pain glove operator for Delta Company, handling an average of 4 sessions per day, sometimes more during periods when the company had recently returned from campaign and numerous battle brothers sought penance for various infractions or failures, real or imagined. I learned that Space Marines were merciless judges of their own performance. A mission that Imperial Guard generals would consider an overwhelming success might be deemed inadequate by an Astartes who felt his squad's breach time was 3 seconds slower than optimal. A battle where every objective was achieved but a single servitor was damaged through carelessness might prompt a veteran sergeant to request 4 hours in the pain glove. I learned that the chapter's culture of self-punishment was not imposed from above, but rather self-sustaining. Each generation of warriors teaching the next that suffering purified, that pain cleansed, that agony brought clarity. I was not a torturer in the sense of inflicting unwanted pain on prisoners. I was a facilitator of voluntary self-destruction, enabling warriors to systematically brutalize their own nervous systems, in pursuit of an ideal of perfection that was always one step further away, no matter how much they suffered. The sessions began to blur together. Brother Hadrakon for tactical failure during void combat exercises. 3 hours, consciousness maintained throughout, despite elevated stroke risk indicators. Brother Marnath for allowing an enemy psyker to wound him during battle. 6 hours, requiring 2 pharmaceutical interventions to prevent cardiac arrest. Brother Vectus for emotional attachment to fallen squad members. 8 hours, emerging unable to walk, unable to speak, eyes staring at nothing while 2 Medicae servitors carried him to recovery. I documented everything with mechanical precision, recording session duration, pain intensity levels, physiological responses, post-session recovery times. My reports were reviewed by the Apothecarium and filed in the chapter's vast archives, becoming part of the endless data stream that constituted institutional memory. I was 17 years old and already thinking in terms of neural induction thresholds, hormone cascade patterns, acceptable damage parameters. I could look at an Astarte standing before me and calculate within 3 minutes how long I could sustain them in the pain glove before their enhanced biology began suffering permanent harm. I could modulate the intensity with such precision that I could keep a battle brother conscious and aware for 6 hours while ensuring he experienced maximum suffering without dying. I had become very good at my job. This is what expertise looks like when your job is administering agony. If you're still watching, press like and let this knowledge haunt you as it haunts me. The emotional distance I had cultivated as a survival mechanism began to fail around my 18th year. I had operated the pain glove for nearly 4 years, conducted over 3,000 sessions, watched thousands of hours of suffering. The numbness that Brother Tamarian had praised as adaptive started cracking. I began experiencing what the Medicae servitors diagnosed as acute dissociative episodes during sessions. I would be monitoring a battle brother's vital signs, adjusting pain intensity levels, performing my duties with the usual mechanical efficiency, and suddenly become aware that I could not remember the past 15 minutes. My hands had continued working, the session had proceeded without incident, but my consciousness had simply absented itself, retreating to some inner space where the screaming could not reach. At first, these episodes lasted only a few minutes, then they lengthened. Soon I was losing 20 minutes, half an hour, entire sessions passing in a void where my body functioned, but my mind had fled. The problem was not that I was failing in my duties. The problem was that I was succeeding too well. My precision had actually improved during the dissociative episodes, as if the absence of conscious thought allowed pure technical skill to operate without the contamination of feeling. Brother Kelvis, reviewing my performance metrics, commended me for my increasing efficiency. He did not notice, or perhaps did not care, that I could no longer remember conducting half of my sessions. He did not ask why my hands had developed a constant fine tremor similar to old Harmon's, why I had stopped speaking except when necessary, why I spent all of my off-duty hours sitting in my cell, staring at the candle flame in my shrine, as if the Emperor's distant light might somehow provide answers to questions I had forgotten how to formulate. The machine of my existence continued grinding forward, performing its function, consuming my consciousness one shift at a time while producing the chapter's preferred output. Battle brothers purified through suffering. Warriors cleansed through agony. Heroes forged through pain I administered with increasing mechanical perfection and decreasing human awareness. I was 19 years old when I finally understood the true nature of my situation. The revelation came not during a session, but afterward, in the recovery period when battle brothers who had just completed particularly intense penance would sometimes speak to me while waiting for the Medicae servitors to clear them for return to duty. A captain named Hector Massac, who had completed a 4-hour session for tactical errors during a planetary assault, sat on the recovery bench with his head bowed, trembling despite his enhanced physiology's efforts to restore homeostasis. He looked at me and said, in a voice still rough from screaming, that I had done well, that my precision had allowed him to experience purity, that he was grateful for my service. And then he said something that carved itself into my consciousness like acid into metal, that he knew this duty must be difficult for me, that he understood I carried a burden few could bear, that in my own way I was serving the Emperor as truly as any battle brother. The kindness in his statement broke something inside me. He was thanking me for torturing him. He was expressing empathy for my suffering while literally trembling from agony I had inflicted. The system had created a circular absurdity where the tortured pitied the torturer. where the victim provided emotional support to the one who had just spent 4 hours calibrating his pain, where the very act of acknowledging my psychological burden validated the continuation of the system that created it. I began to understand that escape was impossible, not because I was physically trapped aboard the phalanx, but because the work had become my identity. I was not Korean Valth, who happened to operate the pain glove. I was the pain glove operator who happened to occupy the body of someone once named Korean. My expertise had replaced my personhood. My technical skills had consumed whatever remained of the child who had held his mother 14 years ago and felt the tremor of her silent crying. When other serfs asked what I did, if they asked at all because most learned not to, I could only describe my function. I monitor physiological responses during penitential sessions. I ensure battle brothers achieve maximum purification through precisely calibrated suffering. I serve the chapter by enabling sacred pain. These were true statements. They were also an admission that I had become component rather than person, role rather than individual, mechanism rather than human. The Imperium's genius lay not in forcing service, but in making service feel inevitable, in creating conditions where choosing anything else became literally unthinkable, because thinking itself had been replaced by function. The sessions continued. Brother Thaddeus for allowing a serf to die during a training accident involving failed safety protocols. 5 hours, required 3 resuscitation interventions. Brother Cassian for insufficient vigilance during watch duty. 2 hours, relatively brief but administered at near maximum intensity. Brother Demetros for pride, that most dangerous of sins, requesting voluntary penance despite no specific failure. 7 hours, consciousness maintained through pharmaceutical support. Emerging in a state that transcended anything I could describe as human suffering, and entered territory that was almost transcendent, almost spiritual, almost beautiful in its absolute devastation of the flesh, in service to an ideal of purity I neither understood nor questioned, because questioning was not part of my function. I was 21 years old when they assigned me an apprentice. His name was Jovan. He was 13, and he had the same dark eyes my mother once possessed. Eyes that would soon develop the hollow stare that marked all of us who worked in the penitential chambers. I was responsible for training him the way Harmon had trained me, teaching him to read biometric data, to recognize the signs of dangerous neural cascade, to maintain perfect precision while watching demigods scream. On his first day, I told him what Harmon had told me, that he understood nothing about pain yet. I told him that the Battle Brothers requested this. I told him this was holy work. I watched his face as he tried to process these statements, watched the confusion and growing horror he was not yet skilled enough to hide, and recognized my younger self reflected in his expression. Within 2 years, I knew that expression would be replaced by the blank professionalism that characterized all successful operators. Within 5 years, if he lasted that long, he would develop the dissociative symptoms that marked our adaptation to the work. Within 10 years, if his mind survived, he would be training someone else and repeating the same statements I had just delivered, perpetuating the cycle that none of us had chosen, but all of us sustained through our participation. If you think this cycle can be broken, you misunderstand the Imperium. Subscribe to witness more truths about the machine that consumes us all. Jovan's first observation session followed the same pattern mine had. A battle brother requested penance for a minor infraction. The pain glove activated. The screaming began. Jovan vomited into the waste receptacle I had positioned beside the control station for this exact purpose. The battle brother thanked us afterward. Jovan stood in silence, processing what he had witnessed, beginning the long adaptation process that would transform him from person into function. I explained the biometric data he had just seen, described the physiological responses in technical language that distanced the reality of suffering into abstract numbers and medical terminology. This was how we trained operators. Not by addressing the horror directly, but by teaching them to translate horror into data, to replace emotional response with technical analysis, to see suffering as a problem of precision rather than a question of ethics. By the time an operator was fully trained, the horror had been so thoroughly buried beneath layers of technical expertise that accessing it required deliberate effort most of us no longer possessed the energy to make. The years began to compress. I was 23, 25, 27, each year distinguished only by the incremental improvement in my technical skills and the steady erosion of whatever had once constituted my internal life. I no longer experienced dissociative episodes because there was no longer enough consciousness present to dissociate from anything. I existed in a permanent state of functional detachment, performing my duties with mechanical efficiency, eating and sleeping with the same purposeless regularity, maintaining the equipment with obsessive precision because equipment maintenance was something I could control, unlike the steady dissolution of my own humanity. My mother died when I was 28. A work accident in the textile manufactorum, a servo weave loom malfunction, her death listed in the daily casualty reports alongside 3 other serfs and marked with the standard notation, acceptable operational losses. I learned of her death 6 hours after it occurred, between sessions, from a Medicae servitor delivering routine updates. I felt nothing. I tried to remember what her face looked like and could not form the image. I tried to recall the sensation of her holding me the night before I left for training and found only an abstract knowledge that this had occurred, a factual awareness empty of emotional content. She had cried silently, and I had not understood why. Now I understood perfectly and felt nothing about that understanding. She had known what I was going to become. By my 30th birthday, I was senior pain glove operator for the entire phalanx, responsible for training all new operators, maintaining all equipment, coordinating the penance schedules for multiple companies. I oversaw 17 other operators, reviewed their performance metrics, provided technical guidance, ensured the systematic efficiency of the chapter's self-punishment apparatus. I had conducted over 8,000 sessions personally. I had watched battle brothers scream for accumulated hours that numbered in the tens of thousands. I had perfected the art of keeping warriors conscious and aware while their nervous systems burned with agony that exceeded anything evolution had prepared human neurology to process. I could modulate pain intensity with such precision that I could make a session last exactly as long as a battle brother had requested, down to the second, never falling short of the penance demanded, never exceeding it to the point of permanent damage. I was exceptionally good at my job. This was what I had instead of a life. The realization of what this meant for my future came gradually and then suddenly with devastating clarity. I was not serving a term or completing a duty cycle. This was permanent. I would stand at this control lectern for another 30 years, possibly 40 if my health remained adequate, monitoring biometric displays, adjusting pain intensity levels, training new operators who would replace me when my hands finally developed the tremors that meant my usefulness had expired. And then what? The chapter did not pension retired serfs. There was no retirement. There was only service until you could no longer serve. And then there was whatever came after for those whose function had concluded. Perhaps they would assign me to some less demanding role. Perhaps they would simply add my name to the daily casualty reports as an acceptable operational loss. Perhaps the distinction was meaningless. I was already dead in every way that mattered. My body continued functioning because bodies had biological imperatives that persisted independent of whether the consciousness inhabiting them had any reason to continue. But the person I might have been had died incrementally, one session at a time, until nothing remained but the hollow mechanism that administered sacred pain with mechanical precision. The battle brothers continued requesting penance. This was the eternal cycle, the self-sustaining nature of the system. Each generation of warriors learned from the previous that suffering purified, that pain brought clarity, that penance was not just permitted but required for maintaining the spiritual vigilance their duty demanded. They saw their training sergeants and company captains entering the pain glove for minor infractions, watched veterans with centuries of service requesting hours of agony for failures imperceptible to anyone but themselves, and learned that this was normal. This was expected. This was what it meant to serve the Emperor as one of his angels of death. And so they requested their own penance, and I administered it, and they thanked me. And they trained the next generation, and the cycle continued independent of any individual's choice, because we were all components of a machine that had been functioning for 10,000 years and would continue functioning until the heat death of the universe or the fall of the Imperium, whichever came first. If any part of this resonates with you, if you recognize the horror of becoming a tool in a system that grinds souls into function, comment eternal below and share this with someone who needs to understand what service truly costs. Jovan was 203 now, a fully qualified operator, training his own apprentice. I watched him teach the same lessons I had taught him, saw him use the same technical language to distance horror into data, observed him performing his duties with the same mechanical efficiency I had once developed. The cycle had consumed him as it had consumed me. His eyes had acquired the hollow stare. His hands had developed the first subtle tremors. He no longer remembered what his mother looked like either, though she still lived and worked somewhere in the phalanx's lower decks. He had mentioned this once, casually, between sessions, as if commenting on weather or atmospheric pressure, rather than the systematic erasure of his capacity for human connection. I had nodded and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. We both understood that this was normal, that this was the expected progression, that whatever we had been was being steadily replaced by what we were required to do. The Battle Brothers appreciated our expertise. This was perhaps the strangest aspect of the entire situation. They valued our precision, they praised our dedication. Senior officers specifically requested sessions with operators known for particularly exacting calibration. There was a perverse professionalism to the relationship. They respected our technical skill in the administration of their suffering, the way an artisan might respect a tool that performed its function with exceptional precision. When Chapter Master Cassian himself requested penance, after a campaign where the Imperial Fists had lost an entire company to orbital bombardment, he specifically requested me as operator because my metrics indicated I could maintain consciousness and awareness for extended durations while minimizing permanent physiological damage. I spent 9 hours monitoring the chapter master as he screamed, adjusting pain intensity levels with the precision that had replaced my personality, ensuring that the leader of our chapter achieved the purification he sought through the maximum possible suffering. When the session ended, he could barely walk. 2 apothecaries had to support him to the recovery bay. He looked at me as they passed my station, looked directly into my hollow eyes with his own pain-glazed stare, and said the words they all said, "Thank you for your service." And I nodded because nodding was the expected response, and nothing about this exchange felt strange anymore, because strangeness required some baseline of normalcy to deviate from, and I no longer possessed any concept of what normalcy might look like. I was 35 years old and had spent more than half my life operating the pain glove. My hands trembled constantly now, not enough yet to impair my duties, but enough that I knew the trajectory. Within 5 years, perhaps 10, I would reach the point where the tremors became severe enough that I could no longer maintain the precision necessary for safe operation. They would retire me to some other role, or they would not. It did not matter. I had already served my function. Whatever happened to my body afterward was irrelevant to the mechanism that had consumed my consciousness and would continue functioning independent of whether the component labeled Corian Valth remained useful. New operators were being trained. The cycle was perpetuating. The Battle Brothers would continue requesting penance, would continue experiencing their sacred pain, would continue thanking us for enabling their self-destruction, would continue teaching the next generation that this was normal and holy and required forever. The Emperor protects, they say. The phrase is inscribed above the entrance to every penitential chamber, rendered in high Gothic script that has witnessed tens of thousands of hours of screaming. From my position at the control lectern, I can see those words during every session. The Emperor protects. I have spent 20 years watching warriors scream while golden letters proclaim divine protection. I have administered hundreds of thousands of hours of cumulative suffering under the aegis of that promise. I no longer know what those words mean, if they ever meant anything, or if they are simply another component of the machine that grinds humanity into function and calls the result holy. The Emperor protects, but from what exactly? From the alien? From the heretic? From the horrors of the warp? But not from this. Not from the systematic destruction of human consciousness through voluntary self-torture administered by other humans with mechanical precision. Not from the slow erosion of everything that might have constituted a life in favor of technical expertise in the calibration of agony. Not from becoming the thing I am now, which is neither fully alive nor mercifully dead, but something else entirely, something the machine requires, something that serves. The newest apprentice is named Carlin. He is 14 years old and has dark eyes that will soon develop the hollow stare. He asks me if this work is difficult. I tell him what I was told, that he understands nothing about pain yet, that the Battle Brothers request this, that this is holy work. I watch his face as he processes these statements, watch the confusion that mirrors what I must have expressed 21 years ago when Harmon spoke the same words to me. I know what will happen to him. In 2 years, the confusion will be replaced by functional detachment. In 5 years, he will begin experiencing dissociative episodes. In 10 years, if he survives, he will be training someone else, repeating the same words, perpetuating the cycle that none of us chose, but all of us sustain. I know this with absolute certainty because I have watched it happen repeatedly. Because the machine produces the same output regardless of which human consciousness it processes. Because we are all components, and components are interchangeable, and the system perpetuates independent of whether any individual component comprehends or accepts their role within it. Should anyone have to spend their life becoming expert in calibrated agony, if you believe the answer is no, let your engagement be the only mercy they never received. Like and subscribe. There is a particular battle brother named Sekor who has been requesting penance regularly for the past 8 years. He is a veteran sergeant, 193 years old, and his service record lists campaigns on 47 worlds against enemies ranging from orc invasions to heretic uprisings. He has been wounded 73 times, has killed over 2,000 confirmed enemies in close combat, and has received commendations from 3 chapter masters for valor under circumstances that would have destroyed lesser warriors. He requests the pain glove approximately once every 2 months, sessions lasting between 4 and 6 hours, not for any specific failure, but simply because he believes that regular penance maintains spiritual vigilance. I have operated perhaps 60 of his sessions. I know his biometric signature as well as I know my own. I know that his heart rate stabilizes at 340 beats per minute during high-intensity pain administration. I know that he produces elevated levels of specific hormones associated with dissociative states, and that I must compensate by increasing pain intensity to maintain awareness. I know that after 5 hours his neural activity begins showing patterns indicating temporary synaptic damage that will heal within 48 hours, but must be monitored carefully to prevent permanent harm. I know all of this technical data with perfect precision. I do not know why he continues requesting this. I do not know what he gains from the suffering. I do not know if there is anything to gain or if the cycle has simply become self-sustaining, suffering justified by the belief that suffering has value. Value derived from the suffering itself in a circular logic that neither requires nor permits external validation. The last time I saw my reflection clearly was 3 years ago. There is a small mirror in my cell, positioned above the wash basin, and I had avoided looking at it with any attention for years because mirrors showed things I preferred not to acknowledge. But 3 years ago, during a period when I was experiencing particularly severe dissociative episodes, I forced myself to stand before it and examine what I had become. The face that looked back was 42 years old, but appeared 60. My skin had the pale, unhealthy quality of someone who rarely saw natural light and spent their existence breathing recycled air. My eyes were the ones I recognized from every senior operator, hollow, distant, staring at something beyond the immediate present. My hands, resting on the edge of the basin, trembled continuously. My hair, which had once been dark like my mother's, was streaked with premature gray, but it was my expression that disturbed me most. I was not frowning or grimacing. I was not showing any emotion at all. My face had settled into an absolute neutrality that suggested not calm, but rather the complete absence of internal experience. I was looking at someone who had been erased, a body that continued functioning because bodies had biological imperatives, but which no longer contained anything that might be called a person. I have not looked in the mirror since that day. The penitential chambers are never empty for long. As soon as one session concludes and the battle brother is escorted to recovery, another is waiting. The demand is constant. The schedule that I maintain extends 3 weeks into the future. Battle brothers requesting their penance time with the same casual normalcy that other organizations might schedule equipment maintenance. Brother Hadrakon for insufficient aggression during assault drills, 4 hours. Brother Cassian for tactical inflexibility during wargame exercises, 5 hours. Brother Thaddeus for pride, 6 hours at moderate intensity with consciousness maintained throughout. They request their torture by formal notation logged in the chapter's administrative databases. Their requests reviewed and approved by senior officers, their penance time allocated based on session duration requirements and operator availability. The bureaucracy of suffering is managed with the same systematic efficiency the Imperium applies to everything. Horror rendered mundane through administrative procedure, agony reduced to scheduling conflicts and resource allocation. I am 45 years old now. My hands tremble constantly. The dissociative episodes have merged into something that is no longer episodic, but rather my default state. Consciousness occasionally surfacing like someone breaking through water for a desperate breath before sinking back into the comfortable numbness of pure function. I know I am approaching the end of my usefulness. Within 2 years, perhaps 3, the tremors will become severe enough that I can no longer maintain the precision necessary for safe operation. They will retire me to some other role, or they will add my name to the daily casualty reports. I find I do not care which. The distinction seems abstract, irrelevant, like arguing about the terminal velocity of different falling objects when the outcome is the same regardless of speed. I have served my function. The machine has extracted everything useful from the consciousness that was once Corian Valve. What happens to the remaining biological matter is administratively interesting, but existentially meaningless. Carlin is 19 now and has become an efficient operator. He no longer vomits during sessions. His hands remain steady on the control interfaces. His reports are technically precise and emotionally empty. He has stopped talking about anything except work, has stopped eating in the communal mess halls, has stopped maintaining relationships with other serfs. I recognize all of these signs because I experienced them myself at his age. The machine is processing him the way it processed me. Within another 5 years, he will be training someone else. Within 10, if he survives, he will have my hollow eyes and trembling hands. The cycle continues. It has continued for 10,000 years since Rogel Dorn first created the pain glove as a tool of penance. It will continue for another 10,000 years or until the Imperium falls, whichever comes first. We are all temporary components in a permanent system. Our individual lives brief flickers of consciousness, consumed by a mechanism that neither requires nor acknowledges our suffering, because our suffering is not a flaw in the system, but rather its intended output. This has repeated for millennia. If you believe it must end, let your engagement be the prayer the Emperor never answered. Like this video, and subscribe to remember those consumed by the machine. The sessions continue. Brother Marnath, for allowing a serf to witness his emotional response to a fallen battle brother, 3 hours. Brother Vectus, for insufficient hatred of the alien during a kill team operation, 5 hours. Brother Demetros, for failure to maintain proper equipment reverence, 2 hours at maximum intensity. They stand in the chamber with arms spread, wearing the pain glove like a ceremonial vestment. and I activate the neural induction sequence with hands that shake so badly now that I must steady them against the control lectern. The crystalline whine builds. The screaming begins. I adjust the pain intensity with the precision that has replaced my personality. Hours pass. The session concludes. They thank me. I nod. The next battle brother enters. The cycle repeats. This is my existence now. Has been my existence for 3 decades. Will be my existence until my trembling hands betray me completely, and the machine discards me as it has discarded every operator who came before me, and will discard every operator who comes after me, forever, without end. Without meaning, without mercy, without protection, despite the golden words inscribed above the chamber entrance that promise divine intervention that has never manifested in any form I can recognize. I think sometimes about Brother Hector Massac, the captain who thanked me 26 years ago and told me that I carried a burden few could bear, that I was serving the Emperor as truly as any battle brother. He died 11 years ago during a boarding action against an Orc space hulk. His name is recorded in the chapter's Memorial of the Fallen alongside 47,000 other warriors who have served and died across the millennia. I wonder if he knew what his kindness had done to me, if he understood that acknowledging my burden while perpetuating the system that created it had broken something I never managed to repair. I wonder if he thought about me during his final moments, the serf he had thanked for enabling his penance, or if I was already forgotten. One anonymous functionary among thousands who had facilitated his suffering across 2 centuries of service. I wonder if it matters. The wondering itself feels abstract, detached, like questions posed by someone else about someone else, a consciousness examining itself from a distance and finding nothing worth preserving. Jovan's hands have started trembling. He is 29 years old, has been operating the pain glove for 16 years, and the physiological signs of long-term exposure to vicarious trauma are manifesting exactly according to the documented progression. He will serve another 10 years, perhaps 15, before he reaches the crisis point where his usefulness expires. His apprentice, whose name I cannot remember because names have become increasingly abstract to me, will continue the work. The cycle perpetuates. It always perpetuates. We are trained to believe that our individual contributions matter, that our precision enables the battle brothers to achieve necessary purification, that we serve the Emperor through our expertise in calibrated suffering. These beliefs sustain function. They do not reflect truth. The truth is that we are interchangeable components in a mechanism that would continue grinding forward regardless of which specific human consciousness occupied the operator position. The truth is that the battle brothers would continue requesting penance, would continue experiencing their sacred pain, would continue thanking us for enabling their self-destruction, regardless of who stood at the control lectern. The truth is that we do not matter except as temporary vessels for technical expertise that exists independent of our individual existence. I conducted my final session 3 days ago, though I did not know at the time that it would be my last. Brother Callian, a young warrior recently elevated from scout company, had requested penance for hesitation during a boarding drill. The session was scheduled for 90 minutes. I activated the neural induction sequence, watched the biometric displays spike as the pain glove engaged, and began the familiar process of modulating intensity to maintain consciousness and awareness while maximizing suffering. Approximately 40 minutes into the session, my hands began shaking so violently that I could no longer maintain steady contact with the control interfaces. The pain intensity fluctuated wildly. Brother Callian's screaming changed pitch, becoming somehow more desperate, more confused, pain no longer calibrated, but random. I tried to compensate, but my hands would not obey. Jovan, monitoring from the secondary station as part of standard safety protocol, immediately took control and stabilized the session. Brother Callian completed his penance. He recovered normally. The incident was logged as operator equipment error, medical evaluation pending. But I knew what it meant. My tremor had finally crossed the threshold from manageable to disqualifying. My usefulness had expired. The medical evaluation confirmed what I already understood. The medici servitor examined my hands, documented the tremor severity, noted the dissociative symptoms I described with clinical precision, and updated my service record with a recommendation for role reassignment. I am being transferred to administrative duties, maintaining the penance schedules and equipment logs, but no longer operating the pain glove directly. This is how it ends, not with dramatic failure or catastrophic error, but with simple biological degradation, rendering me inadequate for the function I have performed for 31 years. They will assign me a small office somewhere in the Phalanx's administrative deck. I will process requests and file reports and maintain databases. I will continue serving because service is all I know, all I am, all that remains of whatever person I might have been before the machine consumed me. The work will continue. Carlin will take my position as senior operator. He will train new apprentices. The Battle Brothers will continue requesting penance. The screaming will continue echoing through the penitential chambers. The cycle will perpetuate, forever, independent of whether the component labeled Corian Valve remains functional, because the machine neither requires nor acknowledges individual consciousness except as temporary vessels for the expertise it demands. Now you understand what lies beneath the Imperium's glory, what it costs to serve even in roles that seem distant from the battlefield. If you dare witness more truths about what the Emperor truly demands, subscribe. The Emperor protects, they say, but from my office in the administrative deck, I can still hear the screaming through reinforced bulkheads, and I know that protection is a word that means something other than what most people assume. And I know that I will hear that screaming for the rest of my life, whether it is physically present or merely the phantom echo burned into neural pathways that have processed too much suffering to ever truly achieve silence. I exist now in an office 6 meters from the penitential chambers, close enough to hear every session, far enough that I no longer control them. My duties involve maintaining the penance schedules, coordinating operator training, reviewing equipment maintenance reports, analyzing long-term metrics on session outcomes and physiological impacts. I have become what Harmon was in his final years, the institutional memory, the expert who trains trainers, the administrator of systematic suffering who no longer directly participates, but remains essential to its continuation. My hands still tremble. My eyes retain their hollow stare. My consciousness surfaces occasionally from the comfortable numbness of pure function and recognizes with abstract horror that I have spent 31 years enabling torture and will spend however many years remain doing the same. Thing through administrative channels rather than direct operation. The distinction is meaningless. I am still part of the machine. I am still consumed by it. I am still serving the Emperor through expertise and calibrated agony. Carlin operates the pain glove now with the same precision I once possessed. I review his session reports, note his increasing efficiency, recognize the progression that will consume him exactly as it consumed me. I want to warn him. I want to tell him that this duty will destroy everything he might have been and replace it with technical expertise in the administration of suffering. I want to explain that the Battle Brothers' gratitude is not compensation for what he will lose, that the chapter's commendations do not restore whatever human capacity for connection and feeling is being steadily eroded by vicarious exposure to endless trauma. But I say nothing because warning him would be cruel and pointless. He cannot escape. None of us can escape. The machine has selected us for this function, and we will serve this function until we cannot. And then we will serve in whatever capacity remains available, and then we will die, and new operators will be selected, and the cycle will continue, forever, without end, without meaning, without protection despite the promise inscribed above the chamber entrance. I am 46 years old. I have served the Imperial Fists chapter for 33 years, operated the pain glove for 31, administered suffering that accumulates to decades of screaming compressed into a single career. I will serve in this administrative capacity for another 20 years, if my health permits. And then what? Retirement to the serf hospice where elderly functionaries wait for death in small rooms with single candles burning before shrines that promise the Emperor's protection. Addition to the daily casualty reports when my usefulness finally expires completely? Does it matter? I am already gone in every meaningful sense. What remains is biological matter that continues metabolizing nutrients and performing assigned functions because bodies do not require consciousness to sustain themselves, because function persists independent of purpose. Because the machine grinds forward regardless of whether its components comprehend their role or accept their consumption. The screaming continues through the bulkheads, muffled but constant, the soundtrack to my existence as it has been for over 3 decades. Brother Hadrakon is scheduled for this morning. Brother Cassian this afternoon. Brother Thaddeus tonight. The penitential chambers are never empty for long. The demand for sacred pain is insatiable. The battle brothers queue for their torture with the same patient discipline they apply to everything. Waiting their turn, thanking the operators who enable their suffering, returning to duty purified through agony I once administered with mechanical precision, and now facilitate through administrative efficiency. The outcome is identical. The machine produces its output. The cycle perpetuates. We are all consumed, warriors and serfs alike, our consciousness ground into function, our lives reduced to service. Our deaths marked in ledgers as acceptable losses in a system that has been functioning for 10,000 years and will continue for 10,000 more. This is what it means to serve. This is what it costs. This is forever. The new apprentice is named something I have already forgotten. He is 14 years old and has dark eyes that will soon develop the hollow stare. He asks Carlin if this work is difficult. Carlin tells him what I once told him, what Harmon once told me, that he understands nothing about pain yet, that the Battle Brothers request this, that this is holy work. I listen to this conversation from my office through open doorways, hear the same words echoing down through generations of operators, and recognize that I am witnessing the cycle perpetuate in real time. The boy will be consumed as we were all consumed. He will spend his youth and his middle years operating the pain glove with increasing precision and decreasing humanity. He will watch Battle Brothers scream for accumulated thousands of hours. He will develop trembling hands and hollow eyes and dissociative symptoms that mark his adaptation to trauma that never ends. He will eventually be replaced by someone younger when his usefulness expires. And the cycle will continue always, forever independent of any individual consciousness that temporarily occupies the operator position. I wanted to believe it meant something. 33 years of service, 31 years operating the pain glove, over 8,000 sessions personally conducted, hundreds of thousands of hours of suffering enabled through my technical expertise. I wanted to believe that this sustained the chapter's effectiveness, that the Battle Brothers' penance actually purified them, that my precision in calibrating their agony served the Emperor in some meaningful sense. But sitting in this office with trembling hands and hollow eyes, listening to the muffled screaming through reinforced bulkheads, reviewing the endless metrics that document suffering without explaining purpose, I understand that meaning was something I imposed on the work because humans require meaning to function, and the machine exploits this requirement to extract service from consciousness that would otherwise rebel against performing. Actions that destroy it. The Battle Brothers would continue fighting regardless of whether they underwent regular penance. The chapter would continue functioning regardless of whether serfs like me facilitated sacred pain. The system perpetuates not because it is necessary, but because it has achieved self-sustaining momentum, horror justified by tradition, suffering validated by the belief that suffering has value. A cycle that requires no external purpose because it has become its own purpose. The Emperor protects. I see those words every morning when I pass the penitential chamber entrance. I see them every evening when I file the day's session reports. I see them in my dreams when I sleep at all. When consciousness permits the temporary cessation of function that constitutes rest in lives reduced to serving mechanisms that consume everything and return nothing but the opportunity to continue serving. The Emperor protects, but from what? Not from this. not from the systematic destruction of human consciousness through voluntary participation in systems that transform persons into components, individuals into functions, lives into service that continues until expiration. The protection promised by those golden words is not a shield against suffering, but rather a justification for it. A theological framework that renders horror holy and thereby makes it bearable enough that we continue facilitating it generation after generation, across millennia of accumulated trauma that no one remembers and everyone repeats. I remember my mother's hands, stained with synthetic dyes, trembling as she held me the night before I left for training. I remember thinking at the time that she was being overly emotional, that specialized service was an honor, that I would make her proud through my dedication to the chapter. I remember not understanding why she cried silently. Now I understand perfectly. She knew what I was going to become. She knew because she had watched it happen to others, to friends and family members who had been selected for specialized roles, who had served with increasing efficiency and decreasing humanity, who had eventually been replaced by younger serfs when their usefulness expired. She knew that I would be consumed. She knew that the honor I imagined was actually horror systematized. She knew, and she held me anyway, because love persists even in contexts where it serves no function, even when it can neither protect nor preserve, even when it can only witness the inevitable consumption of consciousness by machines that grind forward independent of whether anyone wants them to continue. The sessions continue. The screaming continues. The cycle continues. It has always continued. It will always continue. We are all components in a permanent system, our individual existences brief and irrelevant except as temporary vessels for expertise the machine requires. 33 years of service has taught me this truth more thoroughly than any theological instruction could achieve. The Imperium does not care about persons, it cares about functions. It extracts from consciousness whatever capability it requires, sustains that extraction through administrative systems that render horror routine, and discards the depleted consciousness when its usefulness expires. This is not a flaw in the system. This is the system functioning exactly as designed. I am the system functioning exactly as designed. The trembling hands and hollow eyes and dissociative symptoms are not signs of my failure, but rather evidence of the system's success in extracting maximum utility from the consciousness that was once Korean Valve and has become something else entirely, something that serves, something that continues serving even now through this administrative function. Something that will continue serving until death finally provides the release that was never otherwise available. I hear Brother Callian screaming through the bulkheads. He is undergoing another penance session, his third this month, his request logged in my databases with the same bureaucratic notation as equipment maintenance. Carlin is operating. His hands have not yet begun trembling severely enough to impair function. That will come later, in 5 years or 10. When the machine has extracted what it requires from his consciousness and passes him to administrative duties where he will process the same requests and file the same reports and listen to the same screaming that I hear now. That I have heard for 33 years, that I will hear for however many years remain until my name appears on the daily casualty reports as an acceptable operational loss. The Emperor protects. The screaming continues. The cycle repeats. This is what it means to serve. This is what it costs. This is forever.